USD on the.
All right, so this is Jay Boyd. I got Lewis Nesbitt on the other side. We're going to do a podcast on the current state of college basketball and how we see it's changed over the last couple of years. I don't think there is a segment of the basketball world that has changed more in a 10-year span, and I think that's what kind of has preceded the change that we're starting to see in the NBA. The three-point shot, and almost an erasure of the mid-range game at the NBA level. I think all of that stuff kind of started with the way the game changed at the college level. So I got a couple of questions, and we're just going to keep it rolling.
Cool. That sounds good, man. I'm excited.
You said you've only, watched a couple of games, but you keep up with basketball, even if it's just through social media or whatever. What have you thought or what have you heard of this season so far that has interested you?
Well, the first thing that I heard of is there's like no specific powerhouse. Like the names are still the names. So your Kentuckys, Carolinas, Dukes, they're still, seen as your front runners. But in the past, there was always like an elite team that kind of stuck out, but you don't really see that. Like I grew up as a Georgetown fan, so I'm a huge Hoyas fan. The Big East is not what it was before, but it's cool to have Patrick Ewing as a coach. But they're like sort of a middling team. They may make the NCAA tournament like on the outside, but most likely they'll be in the NIT. And so for me, it's just kind of like, watching the game for just watching what could possibly be in the NBA in the future.
Yeah, so kind of going off of that, you're right. There hasn't been one power that's taken over this year. I think in the preseason poll, it was a lot of the blue bloods at the top, like you would expect, the Carolinas and the Dukes and the Kentuckys. I think the top four were actually I know the top four because they played in that New York game like they do every year. It was Duke, Kentucky, Michigan State, and Kansas were the top four teams. And so I think what I've kind of seen is there is no clear number one this year, and I think that might be kind of what we can expect if college basketball continues with this trend of spreading out the talent as dramatically as it has over the last few years. I think last year it's easy to say that's not the case because last year Duke had Zion and Cam Reddish and RJ Barrett, but I think the rest of the country was very spread out talent-wise. Most casual college basketball fans probably couldn't name two kids off of the Kentucky team last year. The Carolina team was still made up of the older guys that we had seen for a while, and then some of the new guys, and they sent 5 kids to the NBA and G League last year, and I think that's going to kind of be the trend with the Blue Bloods, is the Blue Bloods are going to have to fight a little harder. So they're going to get the kids at the top because they are the name on the front of the jersey and they have that brand that goes with their program. But I don't think that their success is just going to be overpowering to the rest of the world because the gap closes when everybody on the court is 18, 19 years old.
Absolutely. Another thing that I noticed, and I think is a big deal, Jay Morant is really, really the one that stands out to me the most because people knew who Jay Morant was and no one paid attention to him early because, obviously him and Zion had a relationship. And then he went to, was it Wichita State he went to, I think?
Wichita State, yeah.
And he was hooping, man. And so I think you're going to see, like you said, a lot more Jay Morants where you're going to see guys from other places and you won't really see them until tournament time. And you're going to be like, man, where did this guy come from? So I think that like you said, that's going to have sort of a spread of talent, which I don't know if that's necessarily good for college basketball monetarily. For the programs, I think they're good, but monetarily, I don't know.
I agree. I think it's going to be spread out like that. Even I can't remember his first name now, but the kid that's at Marquette right now, and they historically they've had a couple of guys. They've had the D Wades and the Jimmy Butlers of the world, so they've kind of made their mark recruiting. They get at least one kid every class, seems like. But the Howard kid that's at Marquette right now is another example. That kid's a hooper. He had like a 50-point game early this season. Like that kid can play some round ball, and I think it's going to kind of be like that for a while. It's going to be more spread out. The Blue Bloods are going to get probably the majority of those guys. Like Carolina's got a great class coming in next year, and so does Kentucky and Duke and the normal schools. But I don't think it's going to be as dominant as they've seen in the past because they're spreading these kids out all over the place. And there's a lot more almost regionalism, I guess, with some of these kids and trying to go to places that are close to them because they know after that, it might be, time to go get this league check, and you're not going to be near your mom after that.
It's true. And, another thing I think that matters, and you probably have a closer sense because I know you did some reporting for college basketball when you were in university, but I think the quality of scouting might be a little off as well, too, because I think kids nowadays are hyped a lot more because of the mixtapes they put together than their actual quality of play. And like, I'm not knocking LeBron James's son, but like everybody's talking about him and watching him. And kids who play against him get the benefit because they get to be seen, but you don't really know. And I mentioned Georgetown. I'm a huge Hoyas fan. Matt McClung went to Georgetown. Matt McClung got thousands and thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Instagram followers from the mixtapes he put together. And he clearly wasn't NBA ready. And he's still at Georgetown now and he can hoop. But those videos make you think that they're otherworldly and they're just kind of like your average hooper. And not to call Matt McClung an average hooper, but like in general, they're not like these standout guys that we once thought they were.
I agree. I think Matt McClung's a great person to bring up when we're having that discussion too, because I remember my boys at App State used to send me his tape like all the time and say, "Oh my gosh, did you see that dunk he had last night?" or stuff like that. And not that I keep up with high school kids a ton, but I scroll through Instagram or whatever, and I see like the House of Highlights stuff and the stuff of these kids dunking on kids that are half their size, kind of like the Zion tape was him dunking on like 5'6" kids that look like they didn't even deserve to be in the same gym as him.
Right.
So I agree with that. I think the hype definitely gets blown up, maybe even out of proportion for a lot of the time on these guys and their skill because they might have the access to a video editor or somebody that can put it on a site like that or get it to a site like that and it gets the clicks, so they get the looks.
And a question I have, because I think you know more than I do, is so like what you said, I think about LaMelo Ball. I just saw something where the Australian season is over, and clearly he couldn't play. Well, I think he could have played college ball, but because there was so many sort of ambiguities about if he played professional or not, did his dad get his money or whatever when he played in Lithuania now? So he just decided to play pro ball. And they showed a stat line. I think he basically was roughly like a double-double or close to a double-double, basically your point guard numbers. And they're projecting him top 5 for sure. And you kind of wonder, like, what effect will overseas ball have on a lot of these guys too? Because what I think is the standout one is Luka. Luka is hooping right now, man. But like everybody's not Luka. And so I kind of find it to be an interesting thing to deal with,
I agree. And that kind of brings up the next point. Do you feel the transition coming from kids making that decision, kind of like LaMelo, and going with the G League route? They offered the $125,000 if you come for the top prospect straight out of high school. And they'll give you your year because you have to have a year of play with the current rule outside of high school. So you either have to go international in college or do the G League route for $125,000. Do you feel the transition with the G League route and the international route moving and taking some of that talent away from college? Or do you think that's going to be a bigger thing in the future?
I think it's a mixed bag. As much as LeVar Ball is sort of an all over the place guy, the thing he tried to do with the JBL, I totally understand. And if he had sort of brought up some goodwill for it, and he got some real sponsors, I think he could have been caused a real issue for college basketball. And I think that's something that you kind of look at and say, well, that he's setting a trend based on the fact that in the NBA and others really want to do. Because like when they made that rule about the one and done, or you have to have 1 year or 19, something like that, I thought that caused a little bit of division. But the thing about it is that if they go overseas, they're not necessarily guaranteed to get the press unless they have a name. So I don't know if that's the answer, because if they go overseas, they know it's probably a 50% chance that they may have to stay over there to hoop for a while. And whereas in college, at least they get seen. But and then so the G League may do it, but again, they're still on charter buses and stuff like that. And so you lose the college lifestyle. And I think a lot of those guys want that college lifestyle. I think in the next NBA collective bargain agreement that comes up, I think what they're going to do is they're going to do the baseball rule, which basically means you can declare right out of high school, or if you go to college, you have to stay, I think it's 3 years or something like that, or 21. I think they're going to do that. I think they're going to do a rule like that, which I personally think makes sense because at that point, what it does is it kind of eliminates some of that watered down talent that's coming, because I think the NBA draft becomes more of a crapshoot because you don't really know what you're getting anymore. So to answer the question, I think overseas ball will play a role, but I think it'll scare a lot of guys. And so the G League thing may work, but the G League has to sort of work their thing where they can get like a greater profile, more TV space, and a greater social media presence. And then once they do that, I think they'll be able to kind of do more.
I agree. I think it's mostly going to be kind of what we're seeing now is it's just going to be thinned out across the country in the blue bloods of the college basketball team, which I love one of those teams. So kind of frustrating seeing the way Carolina's playing right now. I think they're right at 500 right now. I think they're 8-8 and not playing too well. And of course, they're missing a couple of guys with injuries, so that doesn't help. But when you have the turnover that college basketball is seeing right now, with them literally losing 5 kids last year to the NBA or the G League, I think that's just going to kind of become the normal. Because, I mean, Duke lost 3 kids in the first 12 picks or something like that last year. Like, that's going to be the thing because the development is going to be in the college coaches. So the next question or the next thing I want to talk about is, who do you think has a bigger influence on the development of a player at this time, at this current moment, with guys making the transition to the NBA at such a fast rate?
You know, I think it's so important that people understand the role of coaches, right? And some coaches are your long-term developmental, mental, and physical coaches, and some are just I can develop your game, but I'm not necessarily developing your mentals. The story for me that always gets me, because as you know, I coached ball before, coached for quite probably 5-6 years or so, school-wise, and I remember when I was in high school and I tried out for ball, and I remember first year I got cut and I played later on. But the coach was always used the Michael Jordan story, which is the greatest lie they ever tell. And they say Michael Jordan got cut from, his basketball team when he tried out. Number one, that's a lie. Michael Jordan tried out for varsity. He didn't make varsity, so he played JV his first year. So he didn't get cut because he played ball. And then the next year he went out because he was familiar with the coach, the system, and playing organized ball, he then made the varsity team the next year. So it's an absolute lie that these coaches tell these kids. But with that being said, those coaches that tell that lie say a lot about who they are, because they normally don't have good reasons for cutting kids. They either don't know how to use the talent, or they're afraid of the talent because of what's associated with it. Sometimes it's the parent, the AAU, etc. And I've dealt with that where you deal with the parents and the AAU, and sometimes it's a challenge. I think the greatest influence on a basketball player today is not necessarily their coach, but the circle they keep around them. And if their circle emphasizes learning from the coach, I think that helps them. But I think that I don't know what level it is. And the reason I say that is because if you see the guys on TNT or like the NBA on ESPN, they talk about that AAU culture and how it made the players quote unquote soft in the NBA because they wanted to be with their guys that they play AAU ball with. And so what that essentially means was it wasn't necessarily the coach that had them tied together. It was the enjoyment, the personal enjoyment of playing with guys they played with before. And if they can get a coach who can elevate their game or help them pull out something from their teammate, then that helps. But I think being with another guy with a good IQ helps. And that's where the banana boat guys, the LeBron, Chris Pauls, D Wade guys who all hoop together, the Mellows, that makes sense. That's why I wouldn't be surprised if you see down the line where Jay Morant and Zion Williamson, if Zion, sort of stays sort of in the spotlight and Jay continues the sort of the trajectory he's going, I wouldn't be surprised if you see after their rookie deals are done that they don't play together. I would be shocked if they didn't try to play together because I think that's something that they want to do. While I don't think Kyrie and KD played together, again, it's a similar thing. They did a basketball thing outside of the NBA, outside of specific organized ball. And then they started to like each other, and the coach was there to benefit them. Like I give Coach K a lot of credit for managing egos. So the coach plays a role in managing the ego and making sure that those star guys feel like they're still stars while they get to shine with other guys and win. So I would say the actual other players are more influential, their teammates, than the coach, but the coach plays a role if they can find a way to put those teammates together.
I agree. Okay, so is it getting harder for college coaches to develop talent? You brought up Coach K. I agree with your point that he does a fantastic job of managing egos. I think that's kind of what made him perfect for coaching like Team USA and stuff like that, because he can get 5, 10, 15 guys to understand that even though they may be the most talented person on the floor at a given point in time, that it isn't about them, that it's the team at the end of the day. And I do like that about him. Though he's not my favorite because he coaches my least favorite team. And guys like Roy, I think, are more long-term developers. Roy probably would not be a good coach for Team USA because it would frustrate him to no end to have 13 guys on the team that think they're the best player on the court. Like it would drive him nuts because if he has like 3 of those guys on his team, one of them sits the bench. That's just the case. He can't have more than 2 of them running the show at one time. And I think he's more of a long-term development guy because you've seen it over the years. Like right now, the Hills don't have much senior leadership on their team, and they look lost on the court at moments. And he needs 2-3 years to teach principles and defensive stuff that helps bring his teams along and create a better team unit. So do you think it's getting harder for them to develop talent with us basically asking them, and the NBA basically asking them, bring them up to NBA speed in a year and send them to us?
The thing I think is, and I like Roy, and the reason I like Roy is because I remember what he did at Kansas when he went to the Tar Heels. I looked at that and I said, he's a fit because he was very similar to Dean. And Dean was that guy where he demanded respect, but you needed time with Dean. And this is where Michael Jordan really benefited a lot. And I say Dean Smith because he gives Dean Smith a lot of credit as well, where Dean was that long-term guy. And Coach K was actually that guy too for a while because there was a period where Duke was bad because they had so many one-and-done guys come and he couldn't really develop them. But then what K did, which is, I think, I don't know if he intentionally did it, but it was a stroke of genius, is he ended up coaching the Team USA. And then because he created those relationships with Kobe and LeBron and then those NBA guys, what he ended up doing was he created the sort of the aura that he could handle NBA guys. And so then he started to understand the mentality of it. And so those one and done guys would like come to K, and that's where some of those guys stayed. And so when you look at some of the coaches like the Coach K, the Izzos, like Izzo was another guy where he keeps guys for a while because he's building, because I think Roy and Izzo are trying to develop the man. And so when Roy and Izzo put guys in the league after having them for 3 or 4 years, those guys become your Draymond Greens. They become like your scrappy, hardworking guys. So they can put guys in the league, and those guys will be 10-year guys, I think. And so I think it is harder for them because the thing is they have to kind of figure out how to get the most out of it and still be genuine, because I think that's the issue that happens for them is they feel like they're not being genuine. Because, I mean, Roy still says, gosh darn, man. So, like, Roy is that, real Holmesy, folksy kind of guy. Izzo's a guy like that, too, whereas Coach Cal is the perfect example of the opposite, where John Calipari, he's always been a one-and-done guy. And so guys are attracted to him because they know Cal will get me what I need to get. He'll get me in front of the camera, and he'll get me my highlights. He'll schedule right, and I can go. And he has a ton of one-and-done guys, but Cal also doesn't have that relationship with his guys where when guys go to the league, Cal will show up at the draft and be like, oh, these guys are great. And they have a sort of a gratefulness for him. But you don't hear these guys talking about Coach Cal 5-10 years down the line. Whereas you hear guys talking about Coach Izzo and Roy Williams and Coach K down the line because they became surrogate fathers to them. And so you have to see the difference of if you're a star guy and you don't think your college is cut out for you, and okay, the NBA is my look, then that's, I think, where you choose your coach and you go from there. So that's where I use the Jay Morant thing, because I think the coach from Wichita State was on the sort of the radar for a lot of blue bloods. And so he saw like, hey, the blue bloods want this guy, so he's probably a quality guy as far as program stability. So let me go to this guy. I'll get to stand out, and it's in a pretty decent conference, and I'll go there. So I wouldn't have been shocked if Jay Morant stayed another year, because when guys go to programs like that, they want to develop. But he was just so good for out of the gate that, that's what kind of happened for him. And so I think guys like Roy and Izzo, they'll have success, but I think their success will come when it comes to tournament time for conference tournaments and the NCAA tournament. But I think the guys they put in the NBA will be guys that they'll had under their wing for probably 3 years. And so they may seem a little more frustrated at this time, and understandably so.
Yeah, I think Roy kind of gets a bad rap. People doesn't put enough kids in the league, even though he puts as many in the league as anybody. But they say he doesn't put enough kids in the league, and maybe I just hear that a lot and get annoyed by that a lot, because I will defend Roy to the day I die or he dies first. So I just think he gets a bad rap for guys like Ty Lawson and guys like Tyler Hansbrough for that championship team. But I think the NBA game just changed at the perfect transition point, because I think that mark right there when those guys came out of school, that 2009 mark, is when the game started to shift, because that's the same time guys like Steph Curry came into the league and the three-point shot became like candy to NBA players. So Tyler Hansbrough was great in college because he was 6'9" and ran the floor hard and could grab every rebound. But when all of the guys in the post now are 7-foot guys, being 6'9" and scrappy isn't as attractive. And when Ty Lawson's candy is, he's faster than everybody, and maybe he's a little undersized, but as Roy would like to call him, he's a tough little nut. And that doesn't really mean much when all of the guards that you're guarding are 6'4", 6'5", as fast as you, if not faster, and have better ability to shoot the outside shot. So those guys, the league kind of passed them by because it was just in a transition point. Guys like Danny Green are marketable in any age of the NBA because he can shoot the three, he can shoot the mid-range, he can get to the rim, and he plays tenacious D every night. It doesn't matter if it's a Tuesday night game in Charlotte or if it's a Saturday prime time against the Clippers. He's going to show up because defense shows up every night. So guys like that, guys like Wayne Ellington that kind of marketed himself as in the same way, have played in this league for a long time. And I agree with you. It takes the Roys of the world, the Tom Izzos of the world. Another guy I throw in there is a Jim Boeheim. It takes them a little bit longer to develop a guy because they're trying to get to the root, and the root is the kid and the man himself, instead of just, all right, let's make sure that you can box out and run the floor.
Yeah, I was gonna bring Coach Boeheim up, but then you saw transitions with him a little bit because he had Melo, which was like that one guy, and he had a couple of guys to kind of come in and trying to emulate that. I remember when I first started learning how to play basketball, I would watch Jim Boeheim videos, and that 2-3 zone was just a monster. And then when I started coaching, I would watch Jim Boeheim, and as much as I hated zone, I also loved it because the way he executed it was just so flawless, and it was just everyone knew how to do the zone, but what he coached the guys, it was really important on spacing and
he's
basketball IQ. Go ahead.
That's exactly right. It's more of the basketball IQ and the spacing than everything. And he also has made his money off of being able to go to any high school in the country and recruit like a 6'7" guard that wants to run the floor and get that kid to play at the top of his zone. So he's shutting down everything because he's got the biggest, longest kid on the floor playing at the top of a 2-3 zone. I think the only team that doesn't get him on a regular basis is Carolina. They seem to eat the zone apart, and it's because they play with two big guys back to the basket. So that makes it tough on that 2-3 zone because guys have to make decisions in the middle of it. But teams that don't play with two guys back to the basket like the Hills struggle with them. Even the Dukes of the world that play them every year in our ACC slate, they get Duke every once in a while because, they're trying to stretch the floor and get corner threes, for most of their shots. And then, drive and kick is a lot of their game as well, and that doesn't work as well when you got 6'5", 6'6" dudes at the top of the zone spreading their arms and stealing everything you're trying to throw to the top of the key.
And the thing about it is also I hate to leave out Jay Williams at Villanova because I don't really he has a system and Coach in the past I would say Coach Pitino as well, because another thing they did is like obviously pressing and just that fitness that's there. But a lot of times that's something that doesn't translate, where these guys will have you physically ready to play NBA minutes, but then that doesn't translate because you can't waste that energy in the NBA because they'll hit you with their bodies. And then you just don't really have an answer. Like, to look at James Harden, I think is a really perfect example of watching James Harden evolve into the player he is today. And some people may not necessarily like his style of play, but it's effective because he learned what his strengths were and he plays to that. And so even though he does do a lot of ISO ball and ball stopping, when he's on, he's on. And so he's shown that, you got to be able to create, but the most important part is you got to shoot. And I went to college in I guess the rival college with Steph Curry. So I watched Steph Curry play in college, and watching him play, man, you're like, why is this dude shooting from, like, a coach would be pissed off at a guy for shooting from some of the spots Steph was shooting from. But he was so automatic that you're like, God. And so Steph got guys to feel they can do it too. But if you watch Steph shoots with textbook form, and there's guys who don't do textbook form. And so there was I think what it was Kendrick Perkins who recently came out and said Trae Young, who I didn't really think his game would transition from college to the NBA, but it has transitioned because I think he's watched Steph Curry play. And Trae has been doing like that, and doing very similar to what Steph does currently. And I think Kendrick Perkins was like, oh, well, Trae Young is better early on than Steph Curry was early on. But then we're discounting the fact that Steph Curry was injured a lot in his first couple of years. But I think it becomes harder to also know what kind of guys will be good, because I think Trae Young is a heart player. You know what I mean? Like, he had a chip on his shoulder, and people was like, yo, you're not going to be good in the league. So Trae took that from college, especially when they went out in the tournament, and he just ran that in the NBA. So you got to know what kind of guys are going to have that chip even when they have the money. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Trae Young is, their games are very different, but he plays the game to me like Derrick Rose. And Derrick Rose was in that same tournament as Steph in 2008. I think they lost to Kansas in that Elite Eight, and Kansas ended up going to the Final Four. But, yeah, they were in that same tournament together, him, D. Rose, Mario Chalmers. That was like the year of the guard in college basketball or something. And Steph has made a lot of money off of making ridiculous threes, but it doesn't matter what platform he's shooting off of. If he's shooting off 2 feet in the corner, 2 feet top of the key, or if he's got a 1 foot a floater, he has perfect form every time, and it doesn't matter. And I think guys like him, and it's scary that Clay's on the same team, but him and guys like Clay that can make those off-platform shots because they practice those off-platform shots are changing the game at a rate I don't think I've ever seen, but I'm pretty young, I guess.
Well, the other thing is, and I think you were at a couple of basketball practices I did, and I used to get so angry at guys who couldn't shoot because their form was bad, and I was always like, look, man, and I said this early on, and I don't think I was saying anything special, but I was saying, hey, if your point guard can't score, then you're not a point guard. And so that the point guard had to be able to shoot. And you met so many point guards years ago, and I don't want Ty Lawson might fit in that mold, where you had guys who could attack the basket and they could pass and they could dribble circles around you, but they couldn't shoot. And so all you had to do basically is what you said with Jim Boeheim. You create, you put either a 2-3 or a 3-2 zone, or you run a 2-1-2, and you make them shoot. And then that point guard is no longer effective because they can't get in those lanes anymore. They don't have defenses collapsing on them. And then the whole system of sort of offense dies because they can't shoot the ball. So I think the fact that more players now, especially point guards, are becoming more shooters is better for the game, which is why you get the trees and stuff like that. And which are different than the Russell Westbrook, because the Russell Westbrooks are the attack slashing kind of guard. But then it causes the problem of then you have hybrid guards at point, because Steph Curry, while he plays point guard, is he really a point guard? He's more of a 2 than a point. And so you kind of look at that and you're like, how do they work? Because for next year, for example, if D'Angelo Russell is still in Golden State next year, you're going to wonder, if you have D'Angelo running the point with Steph playing the off guard and Clay playing the 3, your whole defense is so stretched out that D'Angelo is going to eat all day because he's a slasher. And so I think a lot of those guys are looking at what Golden State did, and they're understanding that while size does matter, it's not necessarily that important if you can shoot and you always have your guys in motion. And so I'm hoping I see more of that in the college game, especially come, sort of tournament time and come for the future seasons.
All right. Speaking about the tournament and stuff like that, it seems like the tournament, at least in the last little bit, has shown us who's going to be good in college, or who's going to be good transitioning from college to the NBA. Marcus Howard, I think is his name, of the kid that goes to Marquette. He was sensational in the tournament last year. Him and Ja played in a game against each other. Both were sensational. Denzel Valentine, I think, had one game in his tournament senior year, that year that he was lighting everybody up with triple doubles. I think that was the game that they lost to Florida Gulf Coast. That was a 2-15 matchup, and he's done minimal in the league. Curry lit the league on fire, lit the tournament on fire. Same thing for guys like Derrick Rose. So I think the tournament is the most NBA-like basketball that we see all year in college, because the floor gets condensed. Everybody's playing out of their minds, it seems like. Teams that you've never even heard of are playing the games of their lives, like the Mercers and the Lehighs for the Duke people out there. So what do you who do you think wins long term in this system right now, with kids transitioning to the NBA so quickly, maybe even taking that route to go to the G League for a year and taking that check so that they can move up to the league as seamlessly as possible, or even doing the international thing? Do you think that the athletes win of course the athletes seem to win long term with, making the most money possible and capitalizing off of their talent as quickly as possible. But who wins short term? Is it the programs? Is it the programs, and is it the fans? Like last year with Zion and Cam Reddish and RJ Barrett, are we the ones that win the most short term in this current situation?
It's a challenging question for this reason. I recently saw a story, and I don't know if it was true or not, where Zion said that Coach K and someone else told him to go to the NBA because he actually wanted to go back to college for a year. And so I think that is the issue there that they deal with. Because I saw a documentary, it was a 30 for 30 or it's on Netflix or something, where where they were talking about what Kentucky does, or so like the one and done guys, where a lot of these programs, what they do is if they recruit a guy and they think they're one and done, the coach thinks they're one and done. The coach then goes out when they're on the recruiting trail for the next year and they got that one and done guy, and they're accounting that scholarship is available. And so the thing is, they're not even accounting for that guy wanting to stay. And I know in the past, there's been stories about at Kentucky, Coach Cal has, and I mean, if I'm mistaken, forgive me, Coach Cal, but where it's been said Coach Cal cancel a guy's scholarship because a lot of people don't know athletic scholarships in the NCAA are renewable, so the program has to renew it. And so after the 1 year, they don't have to give you any more after that. And so you beg the question of, one, when that coach recruits that player, does that coach want that player to stay more than 1 year? And because is the next guy coming in more attractive than this guy right here? You know, especially if they play the same position. So you have that. The second level is if the coach is there, which I would say Roy is probably a guy who doesn't recruit for one and done, but he will take a one and done because Roy obviously has to win. With that being said, I think as observers and lovers of the college game and choosing between who benefits the most, the athlete or the player, it really depends on the motive of the coach and how much they feel the pressure of their job. Like a Roy, a K, a Izzo, Jay Williams at Villanova, Coach Cal, they don't feel those pressures because they're super high profile guys who know they'll get another job. And I think it's the guys who luck up into a one and done guy, and then they don't necessarily know what to do with them. And so what happens is you get a balance in basketball that I think the Blue Bloods don't like. And so that creates pressure on those top tier coaches to then start pushing for the one and done guys so they can get butts in the seat, because people are going to be there, but they want butts in the seat that are passionate because it drives TV ratings and all of that. And so I think it hurts the player a little bit, because then you'll have guys who play with you'll have a guy that plays with a one and done guy and he looks better because the attention that the one and done guy gets, and he goes to the league and he's not ready. And I'm sure it's happened at Duke. I'm sure it's happened at with the Tar Heels and other programs. And so I think in the end, I think the school can win because they're constantly getting players all the time. So they're always going to get guys. And so I think it's a wash in a sense, because you make it difficult to know if this guy is really good. A perfect example is I went to South Carolina for 2 years, and Frank Martin is there now. He's a very good coach. He recruits well, but the performances that the Gamecocks have put out have been inconsistent at best. Whereas the women's program there, it's like top tier. They won the national title, I think, within the last 5 years. They've been sort of perennial top 5 team. And so I think Frank feels a little bit of pressure because he's pulling in these guys, but he's not getting the results. And the thing is, Jay Morant and Zion Williamson both came from South Carolina. And we all know that Frank talked to them. And so you look at that and you say, well, clearly the programs of the Blue Bloods are going to win because of that. Because if Frank Martin, just imagine if Frank Martin was able to get Zion Williamson and Jay Morant to wear garnet and black. Like, just imagine what that would have done for the South Carolina program. Yes, those guys both would have left after 1 year. I feel confident. But the level that program's recruiting would have went, because then Frank Martin would have been associated with, I can bring one and done guys and I can get you in the league. So I think it helps the Blue Bloods in the long term. And I think it does hurt the players a little bit, because I think some people get the coattail their way into the NBA.
Man, now that I'm thinking about it, seeing Ja Morant and Zion Williamson in a South Carolina jersey, that would have been beautiful. I might have had to get a ticket to go to Columbia. I might have had to do that. Because I'm not throwing Duke any money. I'm not helping their athletic program in any way. And the only way I would see them at any other point would be for me to go to a tournament game and throw a check at those guys, or to go to a Carolina Duke game and throw a check at those guys. But man, if those two were on a team, and I'm a big Frank Martin guy, I think the world kind of, I was saying this to somebody else the other day, I think the world kind of saw Frank Martin in a totally different light after that Final Four they went to in 16.
Yeah, man.
Because I think everybody, including me, only had remembered Frank for the crazy yelling and stuff that he was known for at Kansas State.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
when we saw the much calmer version of Frank Martin, of course you're calmer because your team is winning games to go to the Final Four, and you didn't even think that they'd be sniffing this at the beginning of the year. But the calm version of Frank Martin that we got in that tournament, I think, was a nice reintroduction to him as a coach. I think I've supported him ever since then. I think I always find myself cheering for them. Even I think it was last night they beat Kentucky, and I turned on it to catch the last couple minutes of that.
Yeah, and but the thing is they won a big game, and then they lose to, and I hate to call a program a nobody, but then they lose to a nobody. And so what it does is it questions the consistency and the focus of his coaching and the consistency and focus of the players, which means that when NBA scouts are looking at that, they're like, oh, they got it for Kentucky. So that means that, and the next game is a trap game. Like, this. And so you got to see you get up, and this is how you get scouts to notice you. And then they laid an egg. And then you just look at it and you're like, oh, my God. You're shaking your head because you're like, come on, man. Like, that's not what we're supposed to do. And so it makes those questions come up because, like, I'm pretty sure you saw this, and I'd love to have your opinion on this. When Clemson beat North Carolina, and Roy post-game conference where he was like, I think he said something along the line, he would fire himself. Like, that just showed how deeply hurt Roy was, because I felt like he felt like he was out of control, where there was so many factors that he just really couldn't even control about the basketball thing anymore. And so you feel like he might feel a little disconnected a little bit, and you feel for him because he's a good coach,
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, obviously, I don't know the intentions that Roy had with the post-game commentary after the Clemson game. I watched that game despite being at work. Anyway, I watched that game in its entirety because that record has been a thing of pride for Carolina fans for a long time. And I remember during football season, Carolina was going to get a visit from Clemson, and Clemson went in there, and Carolina ended up failing on a 2-point conversion, and Clemson won the game 21-20, if I'm correct. And before the game, Carolina fans, which I follow a lot on my timeline, were having a discussion of whether they would rather win the football game and give up. The streak was at 0-59. That was Clemson's all-time record when coming to Chapel Hill. They had never won a game in Chapel Hill. 0-59. It would have been 0-60 if they were able to win that game. I think it was Saturday. So it's just been a thing of pride for that Carolina basketball program. And I remember thinking to myself, I would not give up an 0-59 streak for one game against the Clemson Tigers just for them to win a national championship on the back end, and for somebody to be able to say, well, Carolina was the only team to beat them that year. I don't care about that. But obviously, I'm much more invested in the Carolina basketball team than I am in the Carolina football team. At this point, I only cheer for them because I know a couple of guys on the team, and because I was a Carolina fan growing up, I don't really, lose my mind over Carolina football half as much as I lose it over Carolina basketball. And I remember when that game ended on Saturday, I have a coworker that calls himself a Carolina basketball fan, but he's been calling for Roy's job the entire year, with them underperforming, I'll say. Underperforming, he was, calling for Roy's job, saying, oh, he needs to be fired. And, if he loses that streak to Clemson, they've got to fire him. I mean, what can you do? That's the biggest thing that Carolina basketball has. And I was like, I'd probably say that the 6 national championships are pretty high on that list, but okay, whatever. You can have your opinion. And he was going at it, Saturday after they lost that game. And I think that comment, obviously, I don't know the intent, but I think that comment may have been Roy kind of coming back a little bit from the comment he had made the previous week saying, this was the least talented team he had ever had, and kind of shouldering some of the brunt of what he knew would be Carolina fans being disappointed in that moment, and saying, that it was his fault, that he should have made them foul the Clemson team before they were able to get up that three-point attempt that ended up sending it to overtime. So I think that might have been him kind of bringing it back a little bit to gain some of his team's confidence and take away the pain of that loss by carrying the brunt of the consequences. But I'm not sure. I was pretty upset that they lost that game, not gonna lie.
What confuses me is, and I understand because obviously people have to phase out, but when people talk about we need to fire XYZ coach, the immediate next question that I always have is, so who are you getting to replace him? Because that's the next question. Who is replacing Roy Williams at North Carolina?
Thank you. That conversation is one that people don't want to have, because I asked the exact same question. And then there were crazy names through it. He threw out like Becky Hammond at San Antonio.
What?
And she's a phenomenal coach. But she's not coming to Carolina. Those fans would lose their mind. They don't know her. They have no connection to her. She has no connection to Carolina. And if you know anything about Carolina basketball, they always call the North Carolina guys first. Those are the first people they call. They hired Jason Capel, Bill Guthridge, Roy Williams is a Carolina alum. They always go with guys that have familiar names. They always try to keep it in the family to a degree. Even the Matt Brown hire, they went and got somebody that people had a lot of question marks about. They're like, this guy hasn't coached in a while, and he hasn't done anything worth writing about in a long time. He's been out of ESPN desk, but he coached in a Carolina uniform, and that's about all it takes to get in that building. If you had connections to Carolina, you've got a great chance of getting a job, way better chance than anybody outside the program. So when he asked me that same question, flipped it on me, because he didn't have anybody, that I even gave a minute to say, oh, yeah, that's a good one, whatever. So when he asked me that question, I said, there's only 2 college coaches in the country that don't have a sweet gig right now that I would even think about calling, and it's Chris Beard and the current Ohio State coach that used to coach at Butler. Chris Beard is at Texas Tech. I think he's a wonderful coach. I think what they did last year to the national championship, I think that was remarkable. Like, Jared Culver's an NBA guy, and they had a couple of other guys on that team that are shining now, but that was nuts to even make it to that Final Four and then be a couple of shots away from sending Virginia home mad again. I thought that was remarkable. So I'd be calling him pretty quick, because I think he's going to get that big call in the next couple of years. And I can't think of his name. His first name is Chris, if I'm not mistaken, but he coaches at Ohio State now. He used to coach at Butler. I think he's another good one. It took him 3 years in Ohio State, where they haven't been in maybe 10, 15 years right now. And they've been shaky over the last couple of weeks, haven't won some games that a lot of people had them winning. But I think they'll be right there in the end. I think that's probably a Elite 8 team, if not a Final Four team.
Yeah, and the thing that's interesting is even with the Brad Daugherty hire, he was a Carolina alum as well. But the thing about it is when people talk about bringing guys from the NBA to college, like, dude, like, you got to recruit, man, and NBA coaches are not used to that. So bringing anyone from the NBA who doesn't have that work ethic or that familiarity of what is necessary to be a college coach, that's not going to work at all, because yes, you can have a good crop of players and you can have a success 1 year, but college coaching is literally about keeping the trough full all the time. So that means you're on the road all the time getting a new guy in. And as an NBA guy, I mean, how do you promise that? Like, I don't even know how you would navigate those waters. And that's why a lot of college coaches have an issue transitioning to the NBA, because now you're dealing with egos and contracts, and recruiting is out the door. And so the thing that you might have been good at, that's dead. So while I think Becky Hammond will likely get a pro gig in the near future, to mention her for college, I think is It's just sort of on sort of a popularity contest, social media trending kind of thing, in my opinion.
Exactly. It is. And the recruiting trail in college is unforgiving because guys that, like you said, the Mac McClungs of the world, you can't just be a YouTube recruiter. You got to go out to these tournaments and see who can actually play the game of basketball, and not just play a game of basketball. Who can understand the system that you're trying to play and bring it to fruition for you on a basketball court. So guys like Cole Anthony are pretty prototypical NBA players and pretty prototypical Carolina guard. Like, he's fast, runs the floor. Roy knows that he can get some defensive rebounds and possibly some offensive rebounds, and he can shoot the basketball. But he's a can't miss guy. But can you get the Garrison Brooks of the world, the guys that a lot of people didn't have eyes on, the Tony Allens of the world, the guys that don't look glitz and glam and they don't have the same last name as their NBA dad? Can you find those 3 or 4 kids that you need that are going to be glue guys, the Draymond Greens of your college team? You got to have a couple of those scrappy guys, or you won't be making it past that first weekend of the tournament.
Like Kawhi Leonard is the perfect example. Nobody knew who he was. I mean, he was hooping, but nobody knew who Kawhi was. And so you look at a lot of, and the interesting thing, if you look at the NBA right now, a lot of the guys who are like sort of your top tier players, your A-list players, were drafted in the middle of the draft. If you kind of like notice it, a lot of them were like 8 to like 15, which means colleges were missing out on them and NBA scouts are missing on them because the game is really a mental thing. And think about the thing what Kawhi was saying all the time, and everybody put it out. This is what Boardman gets paid or whatever like that. This dude literally was playing college ball with the mentality, I'm gonna just get every loose ball. I'm gonna hustle my butt off, and then I'm gonna work on my game and go from there. Like, I think that's a mentality thing. He didn't even go for glamour. He clearly he wanted to play in the NBA, but he was like, let me do what I know how to do. But the issue is, and this is going back to your coaching question, what is the coach doing to bring it out in you so you figure out what you are, what you're good at? Like, that's really the question is the coach going to bring out in you what you know you're good at so you can work on that? And I don't know if you get that in the one and done. So that's where I would, again, I hope the NBA implements a rule similar to the baseball rules, since I know the collective bargaining thing is coming up, where you have 18 and you can go, or if you go to college, you got to stay for 3 years. I just think that works because while that's a grown-up decision, it's also the decision I think you don't lose either way. Because if you go to the NBA at 18 and you wash, the NBA has the G League, so they'll drop you down and they'll have their own development program to work on you. And then if you go to college, you got the 3 years, so you don't lose as well. Because, I mean, if you go for the NBA, the college for 3 years, you have in a mindset, I got to go to these classes, I got to do so-and-so and so-and-so. And so once you've gone and done those 3 years, it's probably in your head of like, well, let me just get my degree or graduate in 3 years. Like, props to Chaz for graduating in 3 years, So you knock that out and you're like, boom, that's what you do. And so they can have a mindset, but the maturity is there where they win both sides. And where one is maybe has a more professional thing and they learn maybe the NBA is not what they want, or they find out, hey, I'm going to have a degree and I'm going to be an NBA player. Those guys who go to the G League, to the NBA right away, they have those rookie contracts, so they're guaranteed contracts as long as they're drafted in the first round. And then after that, they got a couple of million where if they don't play in NBA games, they play in the G League, but they're getting paid. And at that point, they can make the decision of, okay, is this going to work out? Is this not going to work out? But they'll have money where hopefully they take their advantage of that and pay for themselves to go to college or something, or pay for a trade or some sort of formal education to take them into the business world where they can be productive. But I think they win both ways, because if you got guys just going for 1 year, and while I'm not one of those guys that is like, hey, man, you're stealing from so-and-so, because the amount of money one and done's bringing to a school makes up for the quote-unquote stealing scholarships that they're doing. But you're really doing a disservice for them, because if they go, then they have a new thing in their mind, because we all know the first year of college is just like goofing around. And so for a basketball player, and we're being 100% about this, you only got to, if you're a one and done guy, you only got to pass your first semester. That's it.
Fact.
You only got to pass the first semester, because if you're a one and done guy, you're like, well, I'm literally not going to go to class the second semester because I'm out. I'm out in April or May or whatever. I'm out. I'm going to the draft. I'm going overseas or whatever. And then you do actually waste them. And so I think forcing them to make a decision, an adult decision, because going to college and when you graduate high school, you're making adult decisions at that point. I think it's fair enough to do that. Let them enter the league at 18, or um, um, if they go to college, require them to be in college or out ineligible for 3 years. And people will say something about constitutional, but it's not constitutional because they gave you the option on the front end to come in. And so it sort of, not even sort of, it nullifies that because they gave you an entry option. And then, what it will do is I think it'll help the NBA bolster its G League, because I think what they may actually do, which I think would be cool, is they may move the NBA draft from 2 rounds to 3 rounds if you have an influx, because then what you can do is you can use that 3rd round as a G League draft, and you can start filling out your G League teams with better quality talent, where you have the NBA coaches and trainers starting to sort of get their fingers on them and molding that clay. So that's my opinion on that one.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. Final question. We talked a lot about how international leagues are influencing college talent, how the G League is able to – the G League isn't the first option, obviously. So we talked about how the G League may be taking a couple of those kids here and there, and just the overall talent pool as it applies to one and dones and college coaches and blue bloods maintaining their seniority in the college basketball game as a whole. What do you think, as far as a health level maybe, what do you think of the talent pool of the college game now? Do you think it's as strong as it's ever been? Do you think it's just a lot different than what it's obviously a lot different because the game has changed a ton, but what do you think of the talent pool of the college game right now?
I think with the way the one and done has changed the way college coaches recruit, and the way overseas basketball has infiltrated or has affected the minds of high school athletes. I think what it will do in the long term, especially if the NBA changes their rules, is I think it will benefit the college game more. And the reason I think it'll benefit the college game more is that when guys make the decision to go to college, they'll actually have a true vested interest of being in college. And I mean it on the level of they will want to be citizens of their campus. They'll actually want to learn. They want to contribute. And I think what they'll do is they'll also want to be a part of the program in the long run, which will create a greater basketball IQ. And so what it does is it creates options. And I think as humans evolve and societies evolve, more options are normally good, because then it allows people to kind of whittle themselves into the places they feel most comfortable. And so what I think we'll start seeing is you'll see a more solid crop of guys when they come from the college ranks to the NBA draft. They'll be solid NBA veteran guys. And so what you'll start getting again is your Tyler Hansboroughs, but productive in NBA as well. And so what the people will get is you'll get better basketball IQ. You'll get guys who will be more willing to be team guys, because the star guys won't be in their programs in the same way. And so you'll get those glue guys more coming from college. And I think that will benefit the college game in the long run. Now, what will have to happen or will need to be addressed is these coaches of blue bloods and other colleges, is that it won't be as easy for them anymore. And so they really will have to coach their butts off, or as Roy would say, coach their tail off. And so what you'll see is something that people love about the NFL, and you're going to see parity in college basketball. And I think that is what concerns college programs, specifically the blue bloods across the board, that concerns them, because they don't like parity in college sports. Because if you have parity in sports, it causes it affects TV ratings, it affects money. So when you don't know who's going to win, if you don't have a favorite, it causes a problem. The thing that is really interesting, they talked about the NBA in this way. They said the NBA ratings are down this year. And people are like, why? And it was like, oh, it's the China thing. It's not the China thing. What happened is they changed from super teams to dynamic duos. And when you have dynamic duos, those glue guys are more important, which means you create more parity in the league, which you don't want. The NBA and most big leagues, professional leagues, do not like parity. They like to have a specific team be the upper echelon standout team. You got to have somebody you hate or root for. This is why LeBron going to the Lakers was a big deal. If LeBron was able to convince Kawhi Leonard or Paul George or whoever to go to the Lakers, they would have been the hated team and the ratings would have been through the roof for the NBA. But because LeBron is doing his thing and then these are other teams that are really, really good, they still don't necessarily know who is going to win the title. You got Vegas odds on favorites, but when those playoffs start, you got dynamic duos. And that's hard to tell. And this is where someone mentioned, I think it was James Harden said they missed the Warriors. And you do, because they created the target. They created the goal. They were the gold standard. And when you have parity, you don't have a gold standard anymore. And so that makes it bad for the organization that runs the sport. So because there's no Golden State Warriors, the playoffs are going to be like wobbly because now you don't know who's going to win. You want LeBron. You want to see the Lakers Celtics. And that's why the NBA is okay with 30 plus championships coming from Boston and Los Angeles. They were happy with that. They loved that because at least you have somebody to shoot at. So if somebody new wins, you have that dynamic story. Football is the same. Baseball is sort of the same. You hate the Yankees. You hate the Cowboys and football, even though the Cowboys haven't won anything in like 4,000 years. So in college basketball,
25 years.
Or 25 years, right? So in college basketball, college basketball really wants this, and I'm being honest about this. They want UCLA to be good. They want Texas to be good. They want North Carolina, Duke. They want Georgetown. They want Villanova. They want Michigan State and Michigan. They want those teams to be good. They need them to be good because they need you to hate someone in their conference. So when there's not a team to shoot for in the conference, they need the Dukes to be good. When there's not a team, then they're like, well, I don't know. And then you say college basketball is not good anymore. And it is good. It's just it's equal, and we don't like equality. This is why people rail against socialism. They hate it. They don't want to feel like they're equal to anyone because they want to feel special. So with overseas, you lose some of that familiarity, which is why it takes a special talent to do that. But I think college basketball will benefit in the long run from this.
I think it all goes back to people wanting things to be easy for them. It's easy to cheer for who you want to cheer for. It's easy to root against who you like to root against. It's easy for me to say, man, Carolina's good again this year. That's great. Thank God. We're winning 30 games this year. We're going to walk away with the ACC regular season title. Oh, and Duke's all right or whatever. But we beat them twice, so that's all that matters. You know, stuff like last year, like that year was easy for me. I wasn't stressed out during the basketball season. We won most of those games by 15 points. You know, I'm all right. I was at the house stressed for a couple. We beat Duke twice in the regular season. My life was easy last year. But when things get tighter and they get easier, and there's not a clear launching point, number one, there's no Zion, Cam Reddish, and R.J. Barrett, because that seems like the easy one. And the Golden State Warriors, too, of course, Kevin and Clay and Steph and Draymond. They were easy to aim at for the entire NBA. But when there's not an easy, clear number one, and people have to actually think about, oh, man, who's the best team in the country this year? It's a little bit tougher. Who's the best team in the NBA this year? Oh, it's a little bit tougher because it's not as wide, it's more wide open than it has been in what seems like a long time. But really, that Golden State run wasn't that long. It's just sustained success to us is a wild thing. Even though LeBron has gotten no respect for 8 straight finals appearances.
Exactly.
But it's just easy to say, I like this team, I don't like this team. Why don't you like them? No, I just don't like them. Like the other night, the national championship came on with Clemson and LSU, and I didn't have a dog in the fight. So I'm coming home from work right about time for kickoff, and I'm like, man, I hope we get the best college game I've ever seen in my life. I hope it's like a 50-45 shootout, and every pass is completed, and somebody get mossed every possession. I called my mom on the way home, and she was like, "I have to watch this game. What you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm on the way home." And she was saying that she was cheering for LSU, and I was like, "What?" And my mom went to Carolina. I was like, "Why?" And she was like, "Because I hate Clemson." So it's just easy to pick somebody and root against them, and then you start cheering for the other team. You don't know 3 kids on that team, but you want the other team to lose, so you got to cheer for this one. So it made it easy last year, when you knew who we were cheering against. I cheer for the Hornets, but I'm cheering against the Warriors, and that's more important.
Right, exactly. And but also I think it does is if you don't have a standard, then you don't know if you're good. And I think people have a self-confidence issue. And if they don't know if they're good, then they don't have anything to brag about. And if you don't have anything to brag about, you lose a level of self-importance. And I think that's part of the problem. And so that's when people do this following thing that I think is funny and I don't normally respond to. They bring up their history. And they say, well, we have XYZ total titles. And like a Cowboys fan, not to pick on them, but the Cowboys will be like, well, we have 5 titles. Yeah, but them titles happened before you was born. You know what I'm saying? Like, what are you talking about? You can't count the championships that you didn't even see. But that's what they do because they don't have a clear thing. And so I think that's part of the issue. But I think college basketball will be better in the next 2 or 3 years because of this. And I really am rooting for the NBA to do their part and give the 18-year-olds the ability to go straight into the draft, and then having 3 years required in eligibility or whatever, not qualified to come, so they have to go to college or play overseas or whatever. Because what they want is they want a developed product, and you can't get a developed product unless you see it right away and you sort of take care of it, or they're out and someone else is doing it under the same system for 3 years.
I think that Cowboys comment is perfect because they haven't won a championship since 1995. So whenever a Cowboys fan has the audacity to open their mouth and say something disrespectful about the Panthers, since the Panthers weren't even an organization until 1997, I find it fantastic that they allow me the opportunity to remind them they haven't even won or been to a championship in my lifetime. And the Panthers have been the one in the last 5 years, having only established themselves in 1997.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's
joy
interesting. Well, and I'm a huge soccer fan, so a lot of people talk about History FC, but I'm really not a big fan of it. I mean, like, because here's the thing that I don't understand about it, and you probably can understand this on a sort of recruit level. If your team has that much history, why aren't they always good? You know what I mean? Like, if you're going back 10, 20, 30 years ago, why are you not good right now if you got all this history? I'm a Yankees fan, for example. The Yankees' last World Series was in 2009. It's been a minute. But
yeah, I think it was 9.
It was 2009. So it's 11 years ago. Now, while that is a long time, the Yankees are perennially there all the time. So a Yankees fan can say, well, we have 27 world titles, right? And we can say that because we have a world title in our lifetime and in the last 10 years or so. And they've been good every year. But you can't be someone like, let me think of it. I guess I got to just use the Cowboys. I can't be a Cowboys fan and say, we them boys, which I love seeing the memes when they make jokes about, are you still them boys? But anyways, are you them boys? And you say, well, the last time they won a playoff game was not even Super Bowl. A playoff game was like forever ago. I think they won one recently, but before that, it was like 20 years. And so you're like, I mean, you're not even good. Like, what are you talking about? So don't hand me history and stuff. So I understand, totally what you're saying.
Yep, I'm with you, and I think that's a good note to close on. Don't be out here talking about your history if you haven't done anything in my lifetime.